everyone. My name is Tara Bentley, and I'm the Executive Director of the Indiana Association of Home Educators, otherwise known as the IAHE.
Hi, my name is Amy Bragdon. I am a second-generation homeschooling mom of 3 who also works part-time outside the home and volunteers with the IAHE.
Together, we're your co-hosts for Season 3 of the Homeschool Indiana podcast. With each episode, we'll be here to support you on your homeschooling journey, sharing practical tips, important updates, and encouraging conversations to help you feel more confident and connected. And of course, we'll have some fun along the way. So grab your favorite drink, get comfy, and let's dive in.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Homeschool Indiana podcast. I'm Amy Sager, an IAHE board member and the Director of Communications and Publications. And I'm here today with Bradley Pierce. I'm filling in for our 2 regular co-hosts of the podcast, and I'm excited to be here today. So Bradley Pierce is with Heritage Defense. He's a co-founding attorney of Heritage Defense, where he helps defend parental rights of Christian homeschooling families around the country against threats by social services. After being homeschooled in the late 80s through graduation, Bradley earned a degree in history and English from Baylor University while serving as student body vice president, then went on to earn a Juris Doctor degree from Baylor Law School. He and his wife, Cindy, homeschool their 12 children. And I believe one of those children is fairly new. Is that right?
Yes, just a couple months ago.
Congratulations. That's exciting. Well, we are really happy to have you with us. And today we're going to be talking about 8 laws every Indiana parent should know. So these are important, and my guess is a lot of us Indiana parents don't know all of these. So I'm excited to talk about them. You go ahead and get started. What's the first one that we should know about?
Yeah, well, maybe I could just run through all 8 of them real fast just to tell everybody like the topics. So do vaccine mandates apply to homeschoolers? Who is mandated by law to report child abuse or neglect? When can a child get health care without their parents knowing or consenting? What are the laws about spanking? How long does your child have to ride in a car seat? When can you leave your child in the car while you run in the store? When can a child be left home alone? And can a CPS social worker come into your home without your consent? So we can cover whatever we can get through on this call. Would be great.
Yeah, sounds great. Those are some pretty big questions. So let's dive into that first one.
Yeah, so the first one is about, do vaccine mandates apply to homeschoolers? Most people, and we as an organization, we don't really have a position like should you or should you not do vaccines. We're a legal defense organization. We defend whatever decision parents make on that. If you want to do all of them, none of them, delayed schedule, that's some of them, that's your decision to make, and we're here to defend you making the call on that. And so, it's really your decision, not the government's. It's not the doctors, it's not the government's, it belongs to parents. So a lot of people, though, who look into this very quickly see, oh, wow, there are, actually states mandate that children be vaccinated. But then they also see very quickly that, there are exemptions to those mandates, for religious reasons or for philosophical or personal belief. Every state has some kind of medical exemption as well. And people kind of jump into that. It looks like I need to claim an exemption. But one thing, one question that people often skip is, does the vaccine mandate even apply to homeschoolers in the first place?
Right.
Because oftentimes they apply only to students. And how is student defined? How is school defined? And they can vary from state to state. So there's a lot of states where they do not apply to homeschoolers. And Indiana is actually one of those where it actually, it looks like it does not apply to homeschoolers. And I say looks like because the law is not always perfectly cut and dry as far as what it says. But we would say that the mandates likely do not apply to homeschoolers in Indiana. Immunization is required for entering an accredited or public school. Homeschools are obviously not public schools, and they're also not considered to be they're considered to be unaccredited non-public schools in Indiana. And so because of that, it's not something that you even need to kind of move on and figure out what exemptions do I need as long as you're actually operating an unaccredited non-public homeschool, then vaccine mandates shouldn't apply to you there.
And that's a really good point because it's important for families to understand what homeschooling is in Indiana. And like you said, they're non-accredited, non-public schools with less than one employee. So if parents are following those guidelines and they're actually homeschooling in Indiana, then the vaccine mandates don't apply. So that's good. But I know
Yeah,
we have a lot of parents who maybe pull their kids from the public school to homeschool. And so there can be a little bit of a lack of clarity on that issue. So
right.
that's good to know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the next issue is about mandatory reporting. Who and when is someone required to report any suspicion of child abuse? And at first blush, it's like, well, wait a second, shouldn't we all be reporting? When we see children being abused, and of course, right? Of course, if someone's genuinely harming children, then that's what the government's there for. That they're God's given them that jurisdiction for people that are committing that kind of harm against children.
Definitely.
But what's interesting is that in the criminal law, there's generally not a requirement to report crimes. If you watch some adult murder some other adult, you're not legally required to report that. But people do, right? They do report that because, it's on their conscience or they want to protect other people or they want to see justice or what have you. And so people do report. They do report crimes, even though they're not legally required to. But when it comes to children, there is a legal requirement, not just to report crimes, but really any kind of suspicion of child abuse or even child neglect, both terms of which are very vague and can cover a lot of different things. And so if you don't report, then it's a class B misdemeanor. If you do not report, you can be charged with a crime. If you're a doctor or a counselor or something like that, you can lose your license. And so that results in reporting. And so what ends up happening is because there's basically a gun to people's head, if they don't report, it ends up resulting in major over-reporting of child abuse and child neglect. And
Yes.
the effect of this that we see nationwide is that, whether it's from mandatory, and most reports are from mandatory reporters,
Mhm.
but nationwide, over 90% of reports to CPS are ultimately deemed unfounded. So, only 10% of people reported are actually found to have been abusing or neglecting their children,
Yeah.
which is because of all this over-reporting. Studies show that over 37% of children in the U.S. will be part of a CPS investigation by the time they turn 18. And
Wow, that's
so,
incredible. And
yeah,
that's just in general. That's not just homeschooled children. That's of all.
correct. That's across the board. We don't have exact scientific data, but I think the number's probably slightly lower for homeschooled children,
Mhm.
but not. There's still lots of homeschool families that are being investigated who, it's a false allegation or some kind of overblown allegation. And so we deal with those all the time.
Yeah, I can see that when everything is so vague, right? People want to be on the safer side, so they see their neighbor's, toddler run outside naked because he escaped out the door, and there goes a phone call.
Right. Well, and the number one source is for homeschoolers is the medical community. So doctors and nurses and hospitals, hospital social workers, they are the most frequent source of reports for homeschoolers. Over
Interesting.
in general, for the general public, the number one and number two most common sources of reports are school personnel and law enforcement, which homeschoolers are normally not dealing with school personnel, and hopefully you're not dealing with law enforcement too often. So for homeschoolers, it's a medical community. And so we see a lot of
Mhm.
doctors and urgent cares and hospitals putting policies in place to protect themselves because, their lawyers are there to protect them. So they say, hey, even if you don't suspect child abuse, if a child has more than one recent injury, that's an automatic report. Child under 2 years old has a suspected head injury, that's an automatic report. Or if we have an oblique fracture or spiral fracture, it's an automatic report. We've dealt with numerous cases where the doctors or urgent care was like, we don't, so they said we don't think that you have abused or neglected your child. We just have to report you because that's what our policy says to do.
Interesting. Okay, that's something new that I've learned today. Thanks for sharing that. That's good for homeschoolers to be aware of then. I'm not sure if that's a deterrent maybe from taking your child into the doctor. Hopefully not. We need to see the doctor, but that's a little scary to think about.
Unfortunately, that has created a lot of, I think it does chill parents like willingness, or at least enthusiasm about going to the doctor and going to hospital and urgent care, which is really bad, because if
Right.
children need that care, then they need that care and we need to take them there. And so it is, bad that the government has created this, kind of hostile relationship between parents and doctors. because parents are
Mhm.
afraid of getting reported, if
Yeah.
they fall into one of these categories. Yeah, that said, of course, our advice is still take your child to the doctor, take your child to the hospital, and we can deal with CPS later. And that's what we tell all of our members.
Yeah. That sounds good. Okay.
So, and speaking of taking children to the doctor or hospital, the next law the parents need to know is that minors, so children who have not yet reached the age of majority, who aren't yet 18 in most states, they can actually consent to some of their own health care with doctors and with hospitals without their parents' knowledge or even consent. And so not all of it. It differs from state to state. So there's some things that they can do, most things they can't. But where this normally kind of begins to crop up is when parents take their kind of their preteen to the doctor for checkup, and the doctor or the nurse is like, okay, mom, can you step out of the room while we talk to Susie? And the mom's kind of caught flat-footed, like, what? You've never done this before. This is weird. But
Right.
once a child's hitting like 11, 12, 13 and older, then that's extremely common. And normally what they're wanting to talk with the child about is sex and suicidal things and drugs. That's normally what they're wanting to talk with them about, and see if they're active sexually, and kind of advise them on that, or if they have any kind of depression or drug abuse or things like that. And that can be
Yeah.
pretty traumatic, especially for homeschool children who are like,
Yeah.
hopefully haven't been too exposed. I mean, they're aware of those things, but you know, hopefully aren't having issues with any of those things.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure they think, we get the kids away from the parents, they're much more likely to share these things. So
Right.
so what's the risk here that parents just need to be aware of? It's that their kids are going to be exposed to some of these things that maybe they haven't had a chance to talk to them about, or maybe just some, views on what should be done about these things that parents aren't going to be on board with.
Yeah, it really differs from family to family, how people want to handle that. We normally, I mean, the parents are still paying for everything. Why can't they be in the room, with their child who's still a minor, who's still under your guidance and
Right.
training? And so we encourage parents to stay in the room, um, and not step out. Sometimes that can get tense. That's why it's good for parents to kind of have a conversation with your child on the way there, or in advance, and be like, hey, you know what, the doctor or nurse may ask me to step out, but I'm your mom or your dad, and I should be in there with you. And so, you want me in there with you? And hopefully your child says yes. If your child says no, then that's a whole other conversation that you need to have there. But if your child
Right.
says yes, then it's normally better for your child to be the one to speak up when they ask the parent to step out, for your child to say, you know what? No, I'd like my mom to stay in the room with me.
Yeah, that's a good idea to
But
work
one of
with.
the reasons that they talk about these things is that the law in Indiana on minors making some of their own healthcare decisions. So parental consent is not required for treatment regarding STDs, or if a child is 14 over and living independently, which shouldn't be an issue. But if a child is living independently from their parents, then they don't need parental consent for medical decisions. If the child is 16 or over for pregnancy, then a child can get health care without parental consent.
Wow.
Or if the child is 17 or over for donating blood, they don't need parental consent. So those are, compared to other states, the laws are pretty good there on that. Some states give children way more authority to make their own decisions, but Indiana's pretty good on this.
That's good. That's good. Respecting parental authority a little bit here, at least.
Right.
Good. Okay, what's next?
Another common question is, what are the laws about corporal discipline? So spanking children, what is the law on that? And really, it's legal in every state. The kind of how it's described differs from state to state. But essentially, the parent may use reasonable force when disciplining a child. So it's
Mhm.
not a black and white law, black and white rule on that, but it's whatever's reasonable given the child's age and size and mental capacity and all of that. Just, as long as parents are acting reasonably and disciplining their child and not attacking their child, then that's allowed by law. as long as
And
it's
again,
reasonable.
I kind of see a connection here with the abuse that we talked about, because there's just a vagueness to all of that, isn't there?
Right.
Which I can see
Yes.
could create some issues for some families, because they might have different ideas of what discipline looks like. And of course, people outside the home are going to have different ideas of what's okay.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's one of the problems kind of with the whole CPS jurisdiction in general, because it's not criminal law, which is, criminal law is much more, bright lines, black and white. Most CPS law is way more vague. And so it's a lot more subject to interpretation by social workers and judges and things like that, which is a big part of the problem.
Yeah, definitely. So good to be wise and careful and knowledgeable about this.
Yes. Another thing that parents and our family definitely, we've had lots of car seats. So car seat laws are
You
very
have,
important for families to be aware of. We have a 15-passenger van and there's a bunch of car seats in there.
I
And
bet.
so car seat laws are very important. The rule in Indiana is that a child under 8 years old must be in a child safety seat. So it's a very simple. Some states have more complicated, like, all right, up to this age, this, up to this age, this, up to this age, this, or if this weight, or if this height. Indiana's is very simple. It's not the best law. It requires children, even if they're tall and have, or stocky and all this, they still have to be in a child safety seat until they are 8 years old in Indiana. But at least the law is simple to understand.
That is really simple. And by child safety seat, we're talking about, when they're infants, it's the full-blown car seat, but then you move to booster seats. So is that
Right.
included in that?
Correct. It's whatever is, they kind of leave that up to whatever, as long as you're a child safety seat, as long as you're following the manufacturer's so, if it's a child safety seat and it says from this weight to this weight, then as long as you're following that, then you're fine. So yeah, so it's, you start off, with the infant carrier, and then move up to the full car seat, and then move up to the booster seat as they get older. But as long as what you're doing, you're following manufacturer specifications, and you're fine on.
Okay. Sounds pretty easy here in Indiana.
Yep. Leaving a child in a car unattended. So this comes up a lot. Families, you're out running errands. You have the children in the car. Maybe you have a couple of them that have fallen asleep, and you're like, just need to run in the post office and buy some stamps really fast. This won't take 5-10 minutes, and you're like, I don't want to wake everybody up and drag them out here, and so what are the laws on that?
Whole day could be ruined by dragging all those kids out.
Right. Yep. Yeah. You can mess up their naps and all kind of
Yeah.
issues. So, every parent's been, tempted to just like, hey, just leave them in here. I'm going to run in real fast. So North or Indiana doesn't really have a law on this. Most states do. Indiana's not one. It doesn't have a specific law, I should say. Yeah. Some states say a child's got to be this age with another child over this age, or for this long, or you can't leave the car running, or you must leave the car running, or what have you. It just depends on the state. But
Okay.
Indiana doesn't have a specific law. And that doesn't mean that, hey, it's a total free for all. You can leave your, infant, in a car seat, for an hour while you go grocery shopping. It just means that the law it's more general, right? There's kind of a general child endangerment law. There's a general child abuse, child neglect law that would apply in every case, in every state, no matter where you are and what the law is. We encourage caution on this point because there's so many cases that have arisen, even when parents are following the law, because somebody walks by and thinks, those children don't look old enough to be in there. Or, you get children, you have multiple children in the car, inevitably someone's going to start fighting and, maybe at some point, depending on how old and mature they are.
Thinking about.
And they start screaming at each other.
Yeah, when someone's just passing by outside, that might not look so great.
Yes. And so our encouragement to people is really just get everybody out of the car and take them in. There's been so many cases where, again, even when parents, everything's great, parents are following the law, children are safe. There's been so many times where you get somebody who's a busybody, I guess, and who calls it in, and they have your license plate right there, so it's not like you're anonymous.
Yeah.
So
That's for
our
sure.
advice is, again, really just go ahead and get them out. A few moments inconvenience
Right.
is worth it not to have a CPS case over it. So,
Yeah, for sure. And it
but
reminds
again,
me.
that's not what the law. You don't have to do. That's not what the law is. But really, just use your best judgment on that.
Yeah. And I think in this case, it makes me think of in Indiana as homeschoolers, like our homeschool law is really good. We have very good homeschool laws. We're very free. We have so much freedom, but we just encourage families to educate their kids with excellence. The law may not require all of these things, but we want to be good stewards of these children that God's given us, and we want to educate them well and with excellence and be smart about it. And it just kind of reminds me of this law and what you're saying. The law isn't very specific there. We have a lot of freedom, but at the same time, we want to be smart, right? We want to go
Right.
about this in a smart way that protects our kids and protects us and looks out for them because of the other people and what they might do. So
Right. Yep.
be smart.
Exactly. That kind of moves on to what's the law about leaving a child at home unsupervised. So, when can you leave children at home while you run an errand or have a date night or something like that? Again, most states don't have a law on this, and Indiana is one of those that doesn't have a state law on this as well. So again, there's not a specific guideline for this, but we just encourage
Sure.
parents to use their best judgment. A lot of factors that are considered, whether it's reasonable to leave a child home alone is, obviously how old are they? How mature are they? Do they have a phone? Do they know your number? Do they have a phone? How long are you gone? What time of day are you gone? Are you gone during the day or is it at night? Is there a neighbor that you have a good relationship with that your children know they can run over there if there's an issue? Is your child CPR or first aid certified? How many children are there at home alone? How old are they? How young are they? Is there like a baby there, or very, very small children with, anyways, all those, there's lots of factors that are taken into account to determine whether it's reasonable to leave children home alone. And so again, we just encourage parents to consider all of those things and err on the side of, being extra careful, but,
Yeah.
just consider all of that.
And those are great questions, the ones you were asking. Are those questions that potentially, if someone found out that you left a child or children home alone and they reported you, those are questions that you might be asked, would you say?
Absolutely, yeah. Those
Yeah.
questions basically are coming directly from CPS workers, and that's exactly the kind of things they're going to be asking.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. So that's good for parents to think about when they're trying to make that decision of, is my child old enough to be left at home? You need to consider all those factors, right? Do they have a phone? Is there a neighbor they can call? Are they prepared for any emergencies?
Right. Yep. Exactly. Yep. The last one here is what is the law about CPS coming into your home? When can they come into your home? And the law on this is really based on the U.S. Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, and so it's pretty, it's the same really across the country, and that is that they cannot come into your home unless you consent to it, or there's exigent circumstances is kind of how it's described, which exigent circumstances just means basically an emergency. If a child's yelling, stop stabbing me or something like that, right? They can come right in. They don't need your consent. Or if they have a court order. So in the criminal context, we would call this a warrant. CPS law is kind of quasi-criminal. It's not really criminal law. And so it's not called a warrant. It's just called a court order. So if they have a court order, or if they have exigent circumstances, or if they have your consent, that's the only three ways they can come into your home. And
Okay. So if, in your experience, because we do have families that we talk with from time to time that will have CPS show up at their door and they're asking for advice and what do they do? In your experience, are most of those initial CPS visits without a court order?
Yes. Most of the time they show up, it's without a court order. And it's one reason why I know some folks, you might think like, hey, if they come to the door, just don't answer the door and they'll go away, hopefully. That we encourage our members not to do that. Go ahead and answer the door and just say, excuse me one moment while I get my attorney on the phone, and then call us. If you don't answer the door, that's when they could go get a court order and show back up and they have a court order and they have the police with them. And now you have to do what the court order says. And the court order is probably way more than they were going to do initially. And now you have to agree to it. And if you don't, you get arrested. And so it's just way more escalated. It's potentially, if they show up and you don't answer the door, potentially they go away. But more often, they don't. They'll either go get a court order or they may go talk to your neighbors. And now all your neighbors know you're being investigated. And so there's a whole, we think, generally speaking, that go ahead and answer the door and dealing with it is the best way to go if you have an attorney ready to go. If not, then, you may want to delay a little bit. I mean, it kind of depends. But if for our members, having an attorney ready to go, then, we advise just go ahead and answer it.
Yeah, definitely. So there's kind of a balance there, right, between understanding our rights and not letting them be trampled on, but also being respectful of the system and trying to minimize the overall damage that could come from this kind of thing.
Right. And that's, we know they have a job to do and they've gotten some kind of report from somebody. And so they're wanting to make sure children are safe. And, what we're here to do is to help them, see that these children are safe while making sure that your family is protected and your children are not, don't have to endure unnecessary trauma of private interviews or someone coming through your home or things like that unnecessarily. And so that's what we're here to help minimize all of that, but still getting the case resolved.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I appreciate that. I think we made it through all 8 laws, didn't we?
All right.
That's awesome. Tell us a little bit more, Bradley, kind of related to this. So these are the kinds of things that Heritage Defense works on, right? They deal with problems with these related to these 8 laws and probably more, but this covers a lot of them, I think. So tell us a little bit more about Heritage Defense and what you are here for families.
Yeah. So Heritage Defense, we defend parental rights. So Christian homeschooling families join Heritage Defense. And then if you have a situation, social worker knocking at your door, then you can contact us 24/7 as a member. We can, you can just say, hey, I actually had one just this morning before our office hours, somebody called in, hey, CPS is at my door. And we can advise you. And even sometimes, we'll put it on speakerphone. We'll talk to them on your behalf. And even if you don't have an issue, maybe you're just having having some kind of disagreement with hospitals or doctors or something like that, and you're trying to, or do you think that there's some disgruntled family member who may be wanting to report you? Just helping families navigate situations to avoid cases as well is included. Families can call us, schedule a call with one of our attorneys, get those questions answered. Help families think through issues. That's also included with membership as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay. It sounds like that's a really good resource for families to be aware of. And then I also want to mention before I forget that IAHE members get a 20% discount on Heritage Defense membership. Definitely worth it to do that. I highly recommend that. That's fantastic. And then I know you also offer a vault because I've seen it and I've gone in there and read some in there. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, so we have our law and policy vault. People can go to our website and see this. And so this has like these 8 laws that we just discussed for Indiana are all in there. And they're also in there for every other state. And they're also in there, there's not just these 8 laws, but I think we have more than 24 different areas of law that we have in that vault, and we're adding more all the time. And so you don't even have to be a member of Heritage Defense to access that. You just go to heritagedefense.org and create a login, and you get access to that law and policy vault. So you can see what the laws are in your state about these issues and a whole lot more.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I know that's been really helpful. So appreciate that you guys have that available for families. That's great. Okay, I think that is some great information for families that we talked over today. I really appreciate you being here to go through all of that. And hopefully families will feel just more confident and equipped as they go through life and are raising and homeschooling their children, that they can know a little bit more about the laws. And if they ever have any issues, they can know who to turn to. Heritage Defense. Okay.
Great.
Thanks for being with us, Bradley. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's been great to be with you.